the Human Longevity Project. I hope you got a lot out of episode 3. Diet is certainly one of the most important components of health, and it seems there is more confusion now than ever before. Could it be that much of the confusion is a result of all the toxins that end up in our food supply? This begs the question, is it even possible to be healthy if our planet is sick? A recent study tested the blood of hundreds of people for the presence of 550 toxic chemicals. They found 497, some of which have been banned for decades. So how can we minimize our exposure to these man-made chemicals? And how can we improve our ability to detoxify and clear these compounds in order to feel better? All of these questions will be addressed in the coming episode. Thanks again for joining us on our mission to change the health of the world. Enjoy episode 4.
Humans are very arrogant species, right? We somehow believe that because we have these big brains and we can communicate and we can share ideas and we can do math and we can measure stuff, that we can outsmart the planet.
We don't have a vision for our world. What's going to happen, 50, 100 years from now when our kids are standing around? We've had a dozen more oil spills, and agriculture has taken over most of our land and plowed over most of our trees and cultivated most of our soils. What's that going to look like?
This organism, just this planet, not to mention the rest of the universe, but just this planet is way smarter than we are.
Unfortunately, we've been performing a series of large, uncontrolled experiments for the past several decades where we release all kinds of stuff into the environment, have no idea how it's going to impact us or our children. And the preliminary research on that is not encouraging, shall we say.
My father was the president of the Farming Association where I grew up on Vancouver Island, and he said, Paul, it's the strangest thing. When we moved here in 72, we used to get attacked by insects like crazy, and he said there's hardly any insects here anymore. Very recently, a paper came out that had the word Armageddon, something like Armageddon may be near, and the collective entomologists found that in the last 50 years, there's been a 75% reduction in insect traffic around the world. And I shared that research with my dad, and he got emotional. He said, we're in deep is exactly what he said.
I think one of the biggest mistakes we've made as a people, not just in the US, but worldwide, is not understanding the deep connection between human beings and our environment, and that if we change the environment, we are changing ourselves.
みんな感謝ができてないね。だから地球は破壊していく。人間の心の愚かさというのかな。
Γενικά έχει κάνει. Έχει βάλει το χεράκι του ο κόσμος σε όλη αυτή την καθαριότητα, το περιβάλλον, όλα αυτά. Έχει βάλει το χεράκι του προς το κακό. Γενικά να πούμε, δεν βλέπω την κατάσταση να οδεύει προς το καλό. Βλέπω ανισορροπίες, βλέπω τον κόσμο αναστατωμένο, πότε πολέμους, πότε έτσι, πότε αλλιώς, εισβολές, εκτελέσεις, δολοφονίες, αυτά δεν μ' αρέσουν.
There are two things on our planet that really drive everything that's alive. One is the oceans, the other is the soil. And we spray 1.5 billion pounds of glyphosate on our soil every year right now because we don't like to pick weeds.
There is no such thing as a way right? We can't really throw things away. We're just moving them from one place to another. And I think that's what's happening with a lot of the chemicals that are being released from an industrial standpoint. We have polar bears in the Arctic that have non-stick coating chemicals, perfluorinated chemicals in their bodies because these chemicals migrate around the planet.
It was interesting, there was a study that was done in Canada where they took a bunch of people, and some had been eating organic for the last 20 years, and then they were actually highly skeptical that they found anything in their body. And it was fascinating. They tested for 80 chemicals, and they found in nearly all of them 66, they're positive for 66 of these chemicals. And people said, well, man, I've been eating organic for 20 years. How is that possible? But it's things that are off-gassing inner air, inner water, it's just as well as in our food. And so we should never underestimate that everybody's toxic load is high. And I believe that's why we have a lot of these chronic diseases. I believe that's why cancer is so high. I believe that's why just go down the list of chronic diseases that when I was young, there was not leukemia wards for kids. Well, there is now.
Our toxic load is greater than any time in human history. There's 80,000 chemicals developed since the 1900s. Most of them have been untested. We have exposures to mercury, lead, arsenic, and many other heavy metals that are not even part of our diagnostic model.
Environmental Working Group has done some surveys looking at how many personal care products people use. Men use, I think, on average 6. Women use on average 12 every single day. And through those products are exposed to 168 plus different chemicals every single day before even leaving the bathroom in the morning, which is pretty shocking for a lot of people.
We should care about toxins in our environment and toxins that we put into our systems. We are actually on top of the food chain, and all of these things are contained in our environment. So the species that we eat, be they plant or animal, will also be absorbing these things. And when they absorb these things and when we eat them, then they come to our bodies. We actually have to make sure that from the beginning, we decrease the exposure of the earth itself to these kinds of toxins.
The latest numbers on the carbon-based, let's call them the carbon-based chemicals, insecticides, pesticides, solvents, petrochemical residues, wood preservatives and all that, phthalates, the plastic softeners and bisphenol A. It is currently estimated from fat biopsies that the average human being has between 20 and 30,000 different chemicals stored in our system that the body has to carefully separate from each other so they don't react with each other. And most of our bodies are reaching the point where the body can no longer do that successfully. And that's really the point, the breaking point when we get chronically ill.
When I'm asked the question, what do you think the 3 biggest contributors to the rising rates of cancer are today? I say environment, 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 because it is the toxic environment in which we live that we are not biologically designed to cope with.
We're seeing disease rates increase at a rate that's faster than can be explained by genetics, by evolution, and based on that, it's telling us that there's something happening in our environment, like something external that's causing this uptick in disease.
It's strange. Often when longevity regions and healthy populations are studied, one of the most overlooked aspects seems to be the historical aspect of the environmental toxins. The era in which these centenarians grew up, man-made toxins were scarce or completely non-existent. It's only been in the last 30 or 40 years that these remote villages saw man-made toxins impact their lives in meaningful ways. So when we think about our history in the West over the last 100 years, one has to wonder just how impactful the accumulation of toxins has been on our mitochondria and DNA generation after generation.
If you look at the studies that look at the disease rates increasing for diabetes, for heart disease, for cancer, for autoimmune conditions, they mirror very closely that same sort of arc of the introduction of chemicals in commerce. And I think it's something that is affecting people in a really significant way. It's just also happening in a way that's not obvious. And so it's something that has, for the longest time, just kind of been swept under the water or under the rug or dismissed.
Historically, only acute toxicity was recognized as a problem. So when they would study something like mercury or another toxic substance, they were only looking at the dose, the amount of exposure that would lead to acute toxicity symptoms. And then they would design the study so that they would gradually reduce the exposure until those acute symptoms disappeared. Well, that we know now is a totally inadequate way of determining the effects of a toxin, because we know that toxins can have long-term effects that aren't necessarily obvious with like an acute toxic syndrome.
Well, toxins could be really devastating and kill you really quickly if you get exposed to the wrong levels of certain toxins. You could die in minutes, or you could die slowly by just having them be very diluted, very minimal exposure, but they build up in the body. So we don't really have a good way to detoxify ourselves. We could be breathing toxins and eating toxins in our food and so on, and yet they'll accumulate. They'll cause dysfunction on a cellular level, on a organ level, on a system level, and just the whole organism ends up kind of polluted.
Our mitochondria gives us life, gives us energy, and we really need to pay attention and take care of them because they are exquisitely sensitive to toxins. And so when our mitochondria get sick, we become sick.
So, unfortunately, the amount of chemicals that we're exposed to, it is overwhelming. It is overwhelming for people. My hope is to shift the conversation towards actionable change, right? What can we change so that we can alleviate the burden on our bodies to have to try to process and deal with all of these toxins? And our bodies are magical at being able to do that. The fact that we're all alive is like a miracle considering what we do to ourselves. But it needs help. Like our liver cannot, which is our primary detox organ, cannot handle the load that we're dumping on it.
The good news is, it's not just a matter of how many toxins that we are exposed to, but it's also how well we process them. And so there's a lot of things we can do to help excrete these toxins from our bodies.
I know there's a lot that discounts the importance of detoxification, and I'm not talking about a trendy theory. I'm talking about what the body is meant to do. The body has organs and systems that are appropriately detoxifying for us all the time. We also have processes in the days, like sleep, that are part of detoxification.
A lot of the patients that I work with are really sensitive and they have issues with detoxification. And that's one of the main reasons why they end up in my office. They either present with Alzheimer's or dementia or thyroid disorders or autoimmunity. And then I do the whole workup and I find they have issues with, guess what? Number one, mitochondria, but then number two, issues with the ability to detoxify these poisons.
One of the problems with toxins is they tend to disrupt the very systems that are there to get rid of them. So your liver and your kidney are there to be flushing and clearing out your endogenous toxins, the toxins that are just part of your metabolism. And they're also supposed to deal with the environmental stuff that comes in. But when they get overloaded, they can get shut down by these toxins. They can get in the way of the circulatory system. They're very bad for endothelial function. Endothelial function is the inside of the blood vessels, and when that gets damaged, you start laying down plaque into them to kind of act as a Band-Aid there. And then, of course, immune and neurological are where I think the biggest damages are. And neuroinflammation is where you disrupt another harmony that's going on, this time in the brain, and this is harmony between parasympathetic and sympathetic autonomic nervous states. Parasympathetic is rest, digest, repair, regenerate, and sympathetic is fight or flight. Now, these are supposed to be in their proper relationship where you go into sympathetic, you get stuff done, you're vigilant, you're diligent, and then you go back, you relax and reset. But the toxins are shifting you so you're always on this side of being fight or flight.
And when that happens, you turn off a lot of the repair of the body, you turn off detoxification, you turn off digestion, really, and you're just in this state like this.
So we're doing some research right now with Harvard Medical School, Loma Linda School of Medicine, myself, and Dr. Vijani, and Dr. Martha Herbert, and we're looking at different chemicals. And everyday chemicals, like chemicals found in plastic bottles, like bisphenol A, or fire retardants that are sprayed in furnitures, or formaldehyde that are found in glues and carpets. They're all around us. And what we're finding is that these chemicals, it's not about the quantity that you have in your blood or in your urine when they do testing. It's that these chemicals bind to your actual human proteins. And when they bind to your proteins, they become new antigens. And then they become new antigens, they become a trigger for an inflammatory response. So we published a paper in the Journal of Applied Toxicology a couple of years ago where we looked at 400 random blood donors, and we found about 10%, whichever various chemicals we checked, the population, about 10% of the population antibodies to these. And it was just an observation, and we published it showing chemicals bind to human proteins. We checked human serum albumin, and we found that this becomes a new antigen. And then with subsequent research, we've now published that these are actually very dangerous. So we published a paper where we found a very strong correlation between antibodies to, for example, bisphenol A, people drink plastic bottles from, and attack against their myelin sheath of the nerves. And when you look at research, you look at it in correlation, you look at something called an R value. And R value of 1 is a perfect correlation. We were getting R values of 0.9. So if you had antibodies to BPA, there was a strong risk that you would have antibodies against your own nerve sheaths. So then you heat up your coffee or go to Starbucks and drink coffee, drink through that plastic lid and release all that BPA from the heat into your system. There you start to lose your tolerance. You go to work, you go into your formaldehyde, chemical-laden office and have isocyanate exposures and benzene exposures from gas and other things around you. And now you're getting all these chemicals that you think are part of everyday life, but they can start to break down your tolerance.
Mercury has a special role because it blocks all the enzymes that are needed for detoxing mercury, but with that, we're entrapping all the other metals. And so mercury toxicity is a great precursor to accumulate more metals than to become more affected by the radiation, and then your brain goes, and that's of course the major reason for this epidemic of Alzheimer's disease and other neurological illnesses.
Mercury is an incredibly disruptive element, so it's important to understand forms and sources of mercury and detoxification pathways. So your two major forms, you have methylmercury, which is coming from fish, and then you have inorganic mercury, which is coming from the dental amalgams, and it's also a breakdown product of the fish-based form of mercury. And these move through the body differently, they deposit differently, and they come out differently. So with the mercury tri-test, we look at both of those forms, and then we look at excretion ability with urine and hair.
So we live in this toxic soup, and we have all kinds of mechanisms in our body to help protect us from toxins. Our liver and our lymphatic system and all these wonderful ways to get rid of toxins. But very few people talk about the fact that microbes actually help you get rid of toxins. And one of my favorite studies that I ever read was the study that was done in mice in the 80s, where this guy took two groups of mice, and he fed one group of mice antibiotics, and the other group didn't get antibiotics. And then he fed methylmercury to both groups of mice. And what he found is that the group of mice that actually received the antibiotics retained more of the mercury in their tissues, in their fatty tissues, the liver and the brain, as opposed to the mice who didn't receive the antibiotics. So the lesson there is that, and what the researchers found, is that the microbes actually help protect us from toxins in the environment. And when we go on antibiotics or take proton pump inhibitors or all these things that impact gut health, it actually is making us more vulnerable to the assault of toxins in the environment.
Let's look at what a healthy microbiome does for you in the context of detoxification. Now, this is incredibly important. Detoxification and inflammation are polar opposites, because inflammation is invoked in your body when you want to kill an infection. So when you do that, you downregulate detoxification. And the GI tract is one of the biggest areas where inflammation is being controlled. When you have bad microbiome, you tend to get leaky gut. and you move inflammagens, things that generate inflammation, into the system. Now, that inflammation is going to turn down detoxification. Mercury is known to be a nephrotoxin, a kidney toxin, and it creates molecules that show kidney toxicity. The one they're looking at is serum urea nitrogen. But when there was endotoxin on top of the mercury at the same time, same dose of mercury, there's now a 8-fold jump in the damage to the kidneys. Whereas endotoxin alone doesn't do any of that. And what did that do to the kidneys? Shut down transport of mercury out into the urine. Where does that mercury go? Into the rest of the body.
A friend of mine from the European Food and Safety Administration said, right now we're seeing, lead and mercury, but the thing that we're neglecting is we put in so much cadmium as an anti-rust compound for the rebars that are used for construction. And the buildings were built in 1940s. They're now decrepit, and they have found their way into the water sources, into our food system. And he thinks that this might be the next crisis in terms of the toxin in the body.
So this is a pattern we continue to see throughout history. Since 1945, DDT was widely used in the United States and was considered safe until it was finally banned in the 1970s. We saw massive industrial use of lead for decades in things like paint and gasoline, before finally being removed in the 80s due to health and environmental concerns. Health concerns over asbestos persisted for over 60 years before it was finally banned in the US. So one can only guess, what toxins and metals do our government agencies consider safe today that will be banned tomorrow?
People tend to think that metals get sequestered in the brain. Why would the body stuff things into the brain? Toxins go where they go according to their natures. I mean, one of the myths is that all the toxins are stored in the fat. Well, guess what? This is pretty logical. Fat-soluble toxins get stored in the fat. And metals don't generally. Metals stick to sulfhydryl groups. Sulfhydryl groups are in proteins, and they're in really high amounts in different organs. So like there's tons of sulfhydryls in the thyroid, and hence why thyroid is a big target for heavy metals, and thyroid dysfunction, is a big outcome from heavy metal toxicity.
Toxic metals only attach in our system to places where the body needs metals. And so if there's not enough copper and zinc and molybdenum there, the body puts lead and cadmium and nickel in those places because it functions better with toxic minerals than no minerals.
Mitochondria are acutely sensitive to toxins, especially metals. So if you want to live as an enzyme inside the mitochondria, you have to deal with that. You have to be able to be resistant to that oxidative stress. And so the forms of these important antioxidant and detoxification enzymes inside the mitochondria are a little different than they are outside the mitochondria. And part of that changing their architecture makes them more resistant to oxygen, but it makes them more susceptible to damage by mercury, cadmium, and arsenic, your heavy metals. So mitochondrial enzymes are more susceptible to the metals. That's why probably the number one symptom of metal toxicity is fatigue. You're knocking out the mitochondria. And so getting metals out of the system is super important. And one of the ways that it can exert the damage into the mitochondria is not just by knocking out these pro-oxidant control systems, but by interacting with the sites in the electron transport chain that are supposed to hold the good metals. So the zincs and coppers, heavy metals can kick the native metals out of these enzyme sites. So metals, their effect on the mitochondria is a really, really big deal.
Sometimes I think it's necessary for there to be an event to galvanize our attention, to turn our attention to a subject. And we've had the Flint, Michigan lead in the drinking water issue, which has suddenly sort of galvanized everyone's attention. And you've got cities all around the country that are going, maybe there's lead in my water and we should check. And what they're finding is that there's lead in everyone's water. And so that's just really shining a spotlight on a much bigger issue, because lead is, yes, it's a devastating contaminant to have in our drinking water, but it's certainly not the only one. And so it shines the spotlight on our entire water infrastructure.
Bueno, cuando éramos solos nosotros existían ríos, ¿verdad? Teníamos el río este que se llama el Lagarto y teníamos el Buenavista, que eran ríos limpios, eran ríos muy naturales. Entonces nos abastecíamos para lavar y esas cosas de los ríos y para tomar de pozos, hacían pozos. Entonces eso lo poníamos en vasijas, el agua de tomar en vasijas de barro y se mantiene fresca. Pero nunca tuvimos problemas con el agua.
Είχε πηγές. Όπου υπέρνας, ίσκυβες χάμω και πίνες.
ίδιο νερό που πίνασαι.
Και αυτό που από το βουνό ερχόταν. Είχαμε και, άμα πηγαίναμε να πάρουμε κλαδιά για τα κατσίκια, είχαμε και δυο σίκα μες στη τσέπη. Και όπου βρίσκαμε λιγάκι νεράκι, πίναμε και πάλι πιο πάνω. Το νερό ήταν εδώ πάνω στα πλατάνια, αλλά το κουβαλούσαν με τις στάμνες.
L'acqua si prendeva con un ricarro, si metteva una botte grande, però quelle che portano per il vino, ce l'avevamo apposta per portare l'acqua. E si portava così con la botte. Poi dalla botte le portavamo dentro, nel recipiente che avevamo. Si riempiva piano piano.
We could not have life on this planet without water. Research shows that water has an almost infinite capacity to carry information. Water not only carries information, but it carries energetic input. If we don't have the ability to get water from our environment, then we're not getting information from the environment that our cells need to know how to adjust to the environment. So how does that play out today? Well, you see commercials like Dasani saying 7 times filtered. Well, that means 7 times you've erased the information from the water and you're disconnected from the earth. Then you have the problem that we're buying water that's being shipped from all over the world, be it Fiji or Evian from France or somewhere else, but that water came out of the ground somewhere radically different than where you're at, so you're not getting the right information. Water is what not only connects us to the outer environment, but it's what integrates the inner environment. And water is a conductive substance. Fascia is about 95 to 98% water.
For quite some time, the predominant view has been that we are fundamentally glucose-burning, ATP-driven machines, and that the mitochondria are really the primary locus for understanding cellular bioenergetics. Where do we get the energy to run this body machine? And what has been discovered recently is that on a very basic level, partially because the body is 99% water molecules by number, that water does have the ability to carry a charge, store it, and then transmit it, and actually provides energy on the level of what ATP provides for the human body.
Infrared light has the ability to transform what's called bulk water, the water that we drink every day, into something called exclusion zone water. And around the cells in your body, you must have this exclusion zone water that magically allows proteins to fold, allows mitochondria to make new electrons. If you didn't have water that's been transformed this way, nothing works in the body. You'd be dead.
Jerry Pollack's work, I think, has really helped move that field forward, of showing, very rigorous science, that the structure of water, and to understand that any water inside the body has to be structured.
We found something interesting about water. We found that unlike what we all learn as kids, that water is said to have 3 phases, solid, liquid, and vapor. We actually discovered a 4th phase, and it is not a trivial phase, that is not a trivial amount of water. It's actually a massive amount. Long ago, famous physical chemists suggested a 4th phase, and there's been a lot of talk over the years about an ordered phase of water, that is where the molecules, instead of the water molecules being randomly disposed in the liquid, they're actually ordered in some way, like a liquid crystal of sorts. And that's what we discovered. And why is this important? Well, it's important because this is actually the kind of water that fills your cells. We all think that our cells are built of H2O, but in fact, most of the water in our cells, and also outside our cells, is this fourth phase of water.
Since the cell is anywhere from 60 to 80% water, we see how important it is, but more importantly, what's the charge in that water? So what has been proposed is actually with the aid of the electrical charge of the water inside the cell, or the cytosol, this is how some of the ingredients that are needed by the cell for its proper functioning actually brought in by conformational changes in the cell membrane, or conformational changes in the receptor itself or the channel itself, brought about by the electrostatic charges or the electric charges in the water.
As soon as light hits structured water, it's able to convert a photon into an electron, and that electron is stored around the charge of your cell's membrane and basically starts to act like a battery, or if you like, as an alternative source of energy beyond just our normal food.
This is a mechanism of energy storage that the body uses. It takes energy from outside, light energy, it converts it to potential energy, electrical charge separation and ordering, and then uses this energy to drive all kinds of biological reactions. Is it possible that your capillaries, which receive a lot of light, is it possible that they get energy from the light that builds easy water, charge separation, effectively drives blood through the capillaries? And of course, we wanted to test that idea, and I'm happy to report that, at least in preliminary experiments, it's supportive. So we're pretty confident that the heart may be the major driver for flow in yours and my cardiovascular system, but it may not be the only one. It's apparent that infrared energy is contributing energy to drive the flow in our cardiovascular system, and that energy could come from outside, or it could come from the metabolic reactions that are generating heat in our body.
So water conducts light, there's no question about that. So when we have healthy water in our bodies, we have all the things I talked about, but we have capacity to transfer energy through photons at the speed of light. So it allows the cells of our brain and our toes and our fingers and our heart and our glands and our organs to talk and communicate on a level that's very different.
So when you have a situation with water outside in nature, exposed to infrared, the water can be sitting in a pond, the water can be inside of a plant, for example. This light, especially the infrared light, builds structure, builds easy water. It's also possible that moving water or flowing water builds structure, or I should say builds perhaps more structure. That was studied many years ago by a famous naturalist called Victor Schauberger, who was an Austrian guy. He became a national hero. And what he noticed is in rivers, flowing rivers, there were vortices. And he studied that water, and he concluded that the water that's in a vortex swirling around like a whirlpool, he said this is living water.
Water is a living substance. It's not a dead substance, and there's tons of research, looking into those issues, and that's why I said earlier, water can only be alive and support life in nature if it has the right balance of energy, the right chemistry, and the right organisms in it.
Ci sono foreste di tante sorgenti di acqua buona. Anche un'acqua è la prima cosa buona. Se si sazia l'uomo beve di quell'acqua lì. Anche l'acqua è capo prima roba buona. Tutta acqua buona, acqua originali sono acqua buona. E l'acqua fa molto bene. È una cosa importante anche l'acqua. Non come il samba del capitaneso, Dio santo, come l'acqua di capitano. Questa è l'acqua di montagna. Io per esempio ho fatto il pastore molto su Gennargentu. Ogni 20 metri c'era una sorgente, aveva acqua fresca. Mi saziavo di Casagedo o Cane di Capra e bevevo di quell'acqua lì. È la fonte di ricchezza, l'acqua, no? E l'acqua è una cosa molto importante. E tutto fa parte della longevità. Della longevità, l'acqua anche. E il mangiare è buono, certamente.
I think the convenience factor of our lives and the fact that all of the conveniences that we have, whether it's turning on the air conditioning or turning on the faucet and getting clean water out of it, we lose perspective on what it took for that water to get there. We're totally disconnected from this process, and we take it for granted, and we don't have the kind of gratitude or respect or reverence for the process of getting water, for example. Or if you're a culture that lives that way, right, where you're drinking water and you're traveling half a mile or 10 miles to get your water, there's an incredible respect and reverence for it, because it allows you to see in a really clear way this very intimate connection with the environment. Like, you're not separate from the environment, you are one. And when people are living in environments where that's part of the culture and that's part of the way of life, is that you not only have gratitude towards these things and you don't waste them, right? You don't take them for granted. I think that adds a whole nother dimension to life that we don't have here, right? We just take everything for granted. And I think that divorces us from being connected and feeling connected.
It's our inability to connect with things that are alive anymore. And so you're seeing people all over the world now just, taking off, going on treks, taking sabbatical and going into the Himalayas, or just, sleeping at night, under the stars. And these things bring us whole. They make us feel alive again.
I see people that have had a relationship with the ocean start to kind of deteriorate, and then they start again, and then they just get revigorated, and you see them, I go, yeah, you just can't stop. You can't stop being in that thing. That's, my friend called it the soup of life.
You can imagine a forest and have benefits. You can imagine inside your body. In fact, I was reading not too long ago, just having an image of a forest on a wall, or having that a window into something that was nature, sped up people's healing processes.
I think one of the most profound ways that we can practice preventive medicine is through something called Shinrin-yoku, which is a Japanese term that translated basically means forest bathing. Being in the forest, immersing yourself in the beauty of the forest on a regular basis, improves mood. It reduces stress levels, so cortisol levels drop. It boosts immunity, so people have a better sort of immune response and produce more anti-cancer proteins. They sleep better, they focus better, they have better memory, they have better executive function. There's no drug that does that.
So it's really important to manage our stress levels, and one of the things that seems to do really wonderful things to how we perceive stress and manage stress is being in natural environments. It does appear like being in green spaces is a nootropic. It improves cognition, it decreases stress and cortisol, it improves reaction time, improves creativity, improves strategic and creative thought. So there's something about being out in natural environments that does improve mental abilities. We don't exactly know how or why, but it does appear to upregulate plastic factors in the brain and make the brain re-regulate fairly well. So this is probably more about managing not only stress, but also managing good stimuli your brain is happy to respond to, as opposed to getting overwhelmed by.
So your brain is like a big satellite, and all day long it's taking in information. And it takes in information by what you're feeling. So that can be what's coming in through your hands or any other place on your body. It's what's coming in through your eyes, through your ears, through your sense of taste, through your sense of smell. That's how your brain takes in all the information in the environment around you. Now, if you put yourself in an environment that's very calming, like you go to the beach and there's the sounds of gentle waves and there's the smell of the ocean, and you can feel the warmth of the sun on your skin, and you're with someone who's next to you and you're having a really enriching spiritual conversation, all those are really powerful ways to send really positive healing messages to your brain.
Spending time in nature is probably one of the simplest and most profound things you can do for your health. Not only just brain health, but total health in general. I even think for your soul, right? It heals us at the deep energetic levels of our mitochondria. And just like being surrounded in nature, like grass or trees or things like that, increases oxygenation, which is so important for brain health. And so even if you live in a really big, fast-paced city, it doesn't matter. There has to be like a botanical garden that you can go to, or like a small patch of grass where you can, just lie down and really soak that in and just begin that healing.
So the way we interact with plants is very sensory, initially at least. So we're looking at them and we're appreciating their beauty. we're smelling them, and the aroma of plants goes into our nose and bypasses any processing in the brain, unlike the other senses, and goes straight into our amygdala, activating our primitive brain, which changes our body and our physiology like that. It also triggers memories, right? And all these kinds of connections that are very primal.
Steiner warned in the late 1800s and early 1900s that there's two things human life and all life on Earth depend on: bees and trees.
Τα μελίσσα τα πρωτοπήρα 18 χρονών. Επειδή είχα διαβάσει πόσο ωφελεί αυτό το έντομο πάνω στον πλανήτη, είπα μόνο αυτά θα φτιάξω, δεν φτιάξω άλλα ζώα, τίποτα. Έχω τσιμπηθεί χιλιάδες φορές, αυτό σίγουρα. Έχω τσιμπηθεί χιλιάδες φορές, διότι δεν τις πονάω, δεν είμαι αλλεργικός, δεν βάζω γάδια, εντάξει βάζω εδώ για να μην με τρώνε μες στα μάτια, ας πούμε, μέλισσες. Ξέχασα να πω ότι έχουμε και αυτό οι μελισσοκόμοι, που επειδή μας τσιμπάνε οι μέλισσες δεν έχουμε αθλητικά. Κανένας, όχι μόνο εγώ, έχω και άλλους συνάδελφους οι οποίοι είναι για αυτοί και πιο μεγάλοι από μένα και δεν έχουν αθλητικά το δηλητήριο αυτό που μας βάλει πολύ συχνά και πολλές φορές. Αυτό το χειρότερο που του κάνουν είναι ότι το βράζουν το μέλι και του βάζουν μέσα αρώματα. Όταν το βράσεις το μέλι χάνει όλα του τα συστατικά. Αν ας πούμε το βράσεις στους 100 βαθμούς μένεις και τη ζάχαρη, δεν έχουμε τίποτα από τα συστατικά που έχει το μέλι που είναι τόσο πολλά και τόσο καλά. Το βλέπεις ζαχαρώνει αυτό το άναμα επειδή έχει πολλούς μύκητες μέσα. Να, αυτοί οι μύκητες που έχουν μέσα τα μέλια, όλα τα λουλούδια που τους σκοτώνουν πάνω από 50 βαθμοί όταν το Κελσίου, το σκοτώνει. Αυτό αμέσως, αυτά είναι, πώς να σου πω, είναι φάρμακα για τον οργανισμό αυτοί οι μύκητες οι οποίες τους παράγει το λουλούδι. Δεν είναι κάτι φτιαχτή. Δεν είναι, ας πούμε, δεν τους έχουμε φτιάξει, τους παράγει για να κάνει την επικονίαση. Αυτό πάει η μέλισσα λοιπόν, να πάρει λοιπόν το νέκτα και να πάρει και τη γύρι παίρνοντας σε όλα τα λουλούδια, μεταφέρει τους μύκητες και κάνει την επικονίαση όχι μόνο στα δέντρα, στο κάθε λουλουδάκι που θα βγει και το χόρτο που θα βγει.
And if you look at cultures all around the world, the center of their healthcare, if you want to call it that, or the center of their wellness is plants. And so getting back to that, let's begin to establish a plant-based mentality when it comes to health. Because in our culture, some people would say, well, we have plants in our pharmaceuticals. Yeah, but those are synthetic. Those are made in a lab. Those are crushed, burned, crushed again, set into a pill. We have to get back to the crux, the primal instinct of truly what a plant is. And that is an organism that provides life, that cleans air, but also can purify us, detox us, allow us to be our best selves as well.
とにかく沖縄はやはりこの、食べ物についてほとんどが薬草からできていると言われている。だから沖縄に住んでこの沖縄のこの、食物を食べることによってすごい健康につながっていると私はそれを信じているしまと思っている。で例えばねだけれどもやはり苦織っていうのが沖縄独特のね苦織ゴーヤって言われてあるけれどもあれは糖尿病に効くというようなことがあって要するに薬膳になっているつながっている。
怪我したり指切ったりするね。そしたらもうそこの庭のね草薬草、薬草ついてこうやって入れて縛って止める。
よもぎもこのよもぎをね食べることによって苦いんだけど昔から沖縄のこのことわざに良薬は口に逃がしということがあって。
There's a tremendous amount of literature that has proven now that plants have a lot of the qualities that we have, actually, that we thought we're uniquely human are not really uniquely human. So the concept really is that we have to understand that we're in a healing alliance with plants and that we're in relationship with the plants. And that if we take good care of the world around us, that they'll take good care of us. And that is on a physical level, on an emotional level, and on a spiritual or energetic level, how plants heal us.
And I've always really treasured that idea from ancient systems of medicine, because when we are out of alignment with that, I believe that's where disease enters in. I believe that that's where we get aging. That's where we get the feeling of depression, the feeling like we want to give up when we're not in that harmonized alignment.
どういう意味かというと、お月様と太陽暦と陰暦をともどもにその人間が意識すること、干潮、満潮があるじゃないですか。干潮は私たちの陸によどんだいっぱいの汚れたものを引っ張っていく。満潮は海の底から酸素を送ってくれる。そうしている中で、その仕組みの中で人間は全ての陸の生命体は人間をはじめね、生かされている。
And so when people go to things that are from the earth, our body really responds well to that. What's happened is once you take that earth to earth, that dust to dust relationship, and you sever it, and you put a chemical into it, and then chemists try to mimic that chemical structure, the body just instinctively knows this isn't from the earth. There's something wrong here.
The pharmaceutical companies purify one very potent component of the plant to turn into a drug, and then they produce that synthetically. But actually plants, because they're so complex, have a whole spectrum of compounds from very potent all the way to very weak, and then they actually have compounds that work against that potent effect of the plant. And in that way, plants actually have incredibly diverse and nuanced ways of healing in our body that those drugs never really have.
So there's 65,000 plus species of plants in the Amazon jungle. Less than 3% have been studied for their medicinal value. Of those 3%, a very large amount of our modern medicines are derived from them. So when an ethnobotanist is going down to the jungle to try to find new medicine, they don't just go and start picking plants and trying to study them. The first thing they do is they talk to the indigenous folks that live there. Mark Plotkin is a really respected Harvard ethnobotanist. He has a great quote. He says, if the Amazon is an encyclopedia of medicinal plants, then the indigenous folks that live there are its index and table of contents. When you start, getting embedded in these cultures and you understand the relationships they have with these plants that go back hundreds and thousands of years, you realize, that they're the keepers of this wisdom, and they're really the keepers of probably the last medicine chest we have on this planet.
Comunque io sono stato in Sardegna, sono stato per esempio nella provincia di Nuoro, a Rizzo, lì è tutto altra cosa da quello. È una meraviglia, ci sono erbe di tutti i tipi. Molti americani sono venuti alla ricerca lì, per esempio. Queste erbe nascono spontanee così, non è che siano coltivate, non nascono così e sono efficaci per fare medicinale. È come per esempio la camomilla non è una spontanea.
Bueno, cuando todos lo creíamos que se llamaba, hubo una enfermedad que le llamaban toferina. Yo tuve eso, que era solo tos y tos. Pero aquí hay una hierba que se llama gavilana, no la he ido a meter, es amargo. Entonces papá iba a buscar en el monte y lo cocina ese amargo y lo da a tomar el paludismo, que ahora le dicen, que está pegando, ¿cómo es que le dicen al que hay ahora, mi chipe? El dengue. Yo digo que en ese tiempo le decían paludismo, con solo esa mata, le cocinaban la hoja y no le quitaban a uno eso. No habían pastillas, no había nada.
Think of just extracting from flowers, from trees, and harvesting that, and how we can use that medicinally. So that's another way of really connecting in with the earth, connecting in with nature. I don't think it always has to be in the classic way of being outside and going hiking, although those are wonderful things to do, and it always puts life in perspective for people.
We can't see air, but we know it's there.
and we can't necessarily put our hands on gravity or whatever, but we experience it. It's my belief that the earth is alive, awake, and aware.
There's mountains of great research by people like Cleve Baxter and many others showing that plants are highly conscious as animals in many ways. And if you study shamanism, you'll find over and over again that when shamans are asked how did they learn how to make medicines like ayahuasca and many others, they tell them the plants taught us.
By observing how a plant behaves in its environment, there is information. There's little pieces of the puzzle that gives, an herbalist, vegetalisto, some of them are called down there. It gives them an insight into what it might do in your body. Look at herbalists and how observant they are when they walk in the woods. I walk in the woods, I consider myself to be a pretty connected guy. I still walk in the woods now, and I'm just kind of like, doop, 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 doop. I'm just going to walk around, crunch on this, and try to stay away from the poison ivy. These people are like witnessing, more than just the greenery. Is when they walk into the woods, they know what all those plants are, and they are watching how they interact. And by watching how they interact, they're able to derive a lot of insight into how they're going to behave once they, administer that to their patient.
We get a lot of customers who write in not really believing in natural skincare or organic skincare. They think that because something is $300 in a department store and it's been branded and marketed to do certain things and age defying and all this, terminology that's being used, they think that that's what they need. So we get stories from people like that who are like, I tried something natural and organic and my skin feels amazing. I started glowing within just a couple of days of using it. I mean, even after just the first use.
Παίρνω φάρμακα, περνώ. Το βότανο είναι το πρωί, έχει ένα βότανο που το παίρνω κάθε πρωί. Είναι... όχι το φλασκαμίνο, το φλισκούνι. Φλισκούνι όλα μου τα χρόνια, κάθε πρωί απιω μια κούπα, χωρίς ζάχαρη. Είναι γιατί το δέρμα το κρατάει φρέσκο. Αυτό το έχω κάνει πρωί και να κάνω γέρι.
These aromatic compounds, these phytoncides that the plants emit, these are aromatic compounds that help modulate cortisol. It's like, oh, that's interesting. So there actually is science to back this up. It's not just me feeling better. At the same time, why do you need the science? Of course, nature is important. Of course, nature is valuable to us. That's what we evolved to be in.
The thing is in life, you can either fight nature or you can go with it. And of course, if you're always trying to fight it, you're always going to be expending more and more energy. And unfortunately, life or nature just isn't going to support you. Whereas if you actually tune yourself into what nature can provide for you, what it can nurture, what it can help, basically life and your health becomes much, much easier.
Οπωσδήποτε αυτό είναι το πρώτο. Ήμουνα μέσα στη φύση, μέσα στο χώρο, στο χωριό, στο αυτό, εδώ, εκεί.
El cultivo, yo que porque ahora las cosas vienen ya con cosas que le contaminaban. Yo no cultivo las cosas, no las coge del monte y a comerlas, ¿verdad? No compra así que, como dice usted, comida hecha. Y antes la hacían en la casa y comía lo que es. Entonces, por eso hay yo que es mejor, la costumbre de antes, ¿verdad? Y ahora las costumbres se han perdido.
自然とやっぱり調和できている、長寿の人っていうのは。
街に出て働くというよりか、自然の中にいるのが一番私にとっては幸せである。
Growing up in rural Canada, with both my grandfathers growing food, where we would put our hands in the earth and we would get manure from the neighbor's farm, literally go over and pick up the horse manure out of the stalls, bring it over, mix it into our compost pile, and then eventually work that into the soil. That gave us really good food, like high quality, lots of minerals and phytonutrients and vitamins and things in the food. That's gone. I don't think anyone eats that way anymore. Even organic food today is grown on big farms. It might not have any pesticides or herbicides. That's why you eat it. But as to how much nutrition is in it, I think that it's really deficient. The soils are deficient.
We need reasonable agriculture. We need to
to respect, the less intensive agriculture is very urgent not for our health, I think, for our harmony. Because microbiota can be found in soil, can be found in the deep sea water. You have a lot of microbiota and a lot of bacteria. We don't know all of them. And excessive using of, this chemical or insecticides or these products, coming from chemistry, I think they will alter the quality of microbiota on our soil.
So if we're asking the question, how do we live to 100, and we ignore the source of where all the answers are going to come from, which is the soil, we won't get the adequate results. So the talk really is, we need to step back one more level again. The most important 6 inches in human life is the top 6 inches of soil, in which we are destroying the diversity and complexity through our farming processes.
I think we had a pretty good run at it in the West with this better living through chemistry idea. It's like, wow, we figured out science. We can make a chemical for anything. We can wipe out these bugs. We have nitrogen that we could put into fertilizer and get more food. And it was a pretty good run at it until we went over the top. Right, and it's kind of like an adolescent kind of, realizing that, there are some limits, and, you could drive a car, but you could also crash a car. And so we're at this kind of refractory area now where we're kind of shaking off a hangover from those good old days where we realized we might have overdone it. And so in the West, there's been an amazing amount of progress that has now backlashed on us in a way where, yes, you can put a ton of pesticides to eradicate dandelions from the soccer field, but what that does is it creates an environment where the soil needs more inputs, more fertilizer, more water, and it basically creates a business system for the pesticide company and not the healthiest of soil.
Chemical companies had extra bomb-making material and nerve gas. So they were able to turn that into fertilizer and pesticides. And it turns out these are not needed. If you create healthy soil and create proper diversity, you have healthy plants, and they themselves resist the pests, both the bugs and the weeds. And this has been shown time and again. But by putting the crops on the treadmill of chemicals, you actually weaken the system, and then they need the chemicals. So the whole basis of genetically engineered crops is based on continuing the crutch of chemicals and bad ag.
The glyphosate's going into the soil. It's not just the plant that's being altered, but in the soil, it's killing the whole microbiome of the soil. The plant requires the absorption of the nutrients in the soil to be what it is in identity. You're changing the foundational identity of the plant. You're killing all of the microbes in the soil that give it that identity. And then we're trying to consume it and wonder why we have all these problems and diseases, because we're not getting the nutrient value that we need to be able to exist on this planet and express health and life.
Glyphosate was originally invented as a chelating agent. And so what glyphosate does, it comes in with your bread and with your pasta and with your vegetables, and in the gut it firmly binds to all the trace minerals in the food and makes them completely non-absorbable. The only trace mineral that it binds to that actually facilitates the absorption is aluminium. And so it works as a transport agent for aluminium to the brain. And that's not the end to it, but we know that I have a statistic that shows how much mineral, they just checked for iron and a few core minerals around 1920 when I was first able to measure them. And now, we have more than 90% decline in the mineral content in the nutrition that we have, even organic, because of the depletion of the soil.
Why are the mitochondria underperforming? Why are you not making enough energy at the cell? And what I'm finding, we go back to the chemicals. Glyphosate damaged mitochondria. Antibiotics damage mitochondria as well as DNA.
We started to explore and actually published, I think, the first paper on the relationship between chronic fatigue syndrome and toxins in the environment in 1985. And this was a clinical trial that we had done. It's published in the medical literature. And we gave a report on this data at an age and chronic fatigue syndrome meeting in San Francisco. And
we were pretty much argued off the stage when I presented this data because no one felt that there was such a thing as chronic mitochondriopathy, meaning that you can have just a marginal defect in the mitochondrial function as a consequence of exposure to various kinds of toxic substances. Today, there are hundreds of papers proving that's correct. So I think this construct that our energy powerhouse is dependent in part upon the purity of our environment for its full function is not just a bunch of hand waving. There's something really to it.
Lab in England, Acumen, it's called. They use electron microscopy to break open the mitochondria to look what's in there, and what they find consistently in the mitochondria, aluminium.
We could see that all of these environmental toxins that we're accumulating are actually affecting us one way or the other in terms of our energy production from mitochondria. And you could also see it in terms of the way the microbiota are getting poisoned, and therefore you will have a less robust forest in there that can withstand stress.
We're often chasing, and I think this is something that's unfamiliar to most physicians, is that they're often chasing health restitution through the use of a whole food diet, but they're failing to understand that those foods may be derived from soils and from a growing environment that hasn't placed that plant under enough stress to provide adequate support for its immune system. So we then fall into, it's a fiber, it's a caloric element, but it doesn't contain these metabolites or these compounds that will be metabolized as viable things. And that misses a great chunk of our history. You know, you and I emerged from the generations of people who survived by instinctively cultivating foods that contain these compounds in order to survive more efficiently. Animals do it, humans do it, and yet we're now in a position where we can manipulate those plants to the point where sweetness is favored over bitterness. And in doing so, we remove an historical legacy of immunological communication between us and the plant world. If we want to live a healthy 100 years, we have to do that in cooperation with the organisms that we share our body with. If we're no longer providing them with the substrates necessary for them to live a happy life, it's like being an employer and not paying your staff. You do not get the job done. Unhappy staff means a poor productivity. Unhappy bacteria means poor health. And driving that, no matter when we go to the best shops and we choose the brightest colouring looking vegetables, if those vegetables have had a stress-reduced existence, their molecular messages are diminished in their viability.
So if we try to protect plants from pests using chemical pesticides and herbicides, and don't give plants the right soil that allows them to produce their own natural chemical defenses in the way of colors, polyphenols, and phytochemicals, we lose out on some of the beneficial compounds these plants would produce. These are the compounds that then communicate to our microbiota and our mitochondria to improve our immune function and facilitate health. In essence, as Dr. Ash stated, these plants are transferring knowledge to us in the way of microbes, plant compounds, and microRNA. Without this transfer of knowledge from plants about the local environment, the epigenetic expression of our microbiota and our mitochondria and our DNA will often result in imbalanced function given the context of our altered environment.
You know, when we look at food and eating, it's from the earth to the kitchen to the table, and we're bypassing lots of those arenas. I think one of the things that's been really interesting in recent developments are like soil-based probiotics in a pill form, right? We're trying to get more soil into our diets, and the exposure of the soils brings us, we don't even know how much diversity comes with the foods that we eat from our own environment, from the dirt that is in our environment. We can't even put a label on what we get when we're actually eating from the earth that's around us.
So one thing that we do around here is save eggshells and compost. It's really good not only for the environment, but for our soil, for our chickens, for everything in the backyard. So part of our routine and part of the way that we entrain our circadian rhythms is just reconnecting with nature instead of throwing a bunch of food away, and letting it go into the waste, which really it goes somewhere. We think garbage just gets dealt with, but it ends up on the earth. So we'll go in the compost and show you what that looks like. Yeah, so it's nothing pretty or extravagant, but the idea here is we take the long clippings, all of our leftover fruits and vegetables, which we eat, most of our diet with, and coffee grounds, throw them in there, and then it's great for my daughter. She knows what compost is and what bacteria is. One of my morning routines is just mixing and churning the compost. I do it with my daughter, and she loves seeing the steam come up. Again, it's a little warm, so you can see it a little bit here, but it's a good arm workout. It's a good way to get natural sunlight first thing in the morning. Obviously, it's good for your garden. You can get the worms out. Sometimes we give the worms to the chickens, and they absolutely love it. There's many different ways to compost. And I'm not trying to actively grow worms in here, even though they find their way into it. And so I just put them back into the garden, and they'll help churn the soil. Supposedly, they get rid of glyphosate. From the soil. I've heard that and read about that. So I do this with my daughter, and she loves it. So I'll just throw the worms back in there like that. We'll do that for like 10 minutes in the morning, or give them to the chickens. So what the worms do, again, I didn't grow up gardening, didn't grow up on a farm, just kind of self-taught. But what the worms do is they help churn the soil and kind of break up some of the organic matter. And it makes the plants just grow faster with less fertilizer. So, you start thinking about things in a different way when you start utilizing different parts of your brain. So that's what I noticed, which was kind of fun. So it adds a little bit of novelty to your life. Again, not only is it good for your health, your microbiome, your oral microbiome, just getting your hands dirty and exposing yourself to vegetables, but it's really good for your brain and the novelty. And then not only that, not only learning how to make garden beds and learning a new skill set with gardening, but also being more in touch with nature, learning more about, the cycles of, what grows really well, for example, in the spring or the summer versus the fall, and how to soak seeds and how to sprout them, and different components of vegetables. It really draws on all these different skill sets that we're not taught in school.
Ahorita yo estoy parado, yo siempre sembraba mi hortaliza y la tengo. El año pasado no seguí porque tuvimos un verano muy cruel. Pero sí, yo siempre cultivo yuca, tiquisque, chamoles, cuadrados. El año antepasado, sembré tomate, sembré chile para traer los niños a la escuela, para que observaran. Pero viera qué piñas de tomates, de 5 o 6 tomates cada piña. Y digo yo, pero ¿por qué la gente no siembra? Si la tierra da. Después el año pasado quería hacer lo mismo, pero el verano fue cruel y vamos a ver este otro. A mí me gusta siempre sembrar.
Part of the advantage of growing your own food is you get different food that's not going to be found in grocery stores. When we go to the store, we all know to eat more greens. And so for a lot of people, that's spinach, that's kale, that's collards. But when you grow your own vegetable, you can get things like mustard greens. So this is going to be a Mizuna, a mustard green. And even just the kale, I'll pull this off so you guys can see. I'll eat it later, but it's really a lot, the texture and the purple characteristics, the polyphenols, are a lot different from the kale that you get at the grocery store. So it's one major advantage. Again, not only is it good for your health, but it's good for your microbiome, your bacterial diversity, and you're getting a different type. Here's another type of vegetable too. So this mustard green. You might be able to get this at the farmer's market during certain times of the year, but I grow this year round. You can actually taste, I'll let you guys try it. So it's got a nice spice to it. And a lot of people maybe they want something maybe bland, because most of processed food is bland, so that's what they're used to. But once they try this, I've had a lot of friends over for dinner that aren't totally into natural health like I am, and they try some of these bitter greens and are like, oh my gosh, what is that? Where'd you get that? How do I find this? They're really, the human body is naturally attracted to it. So these bitter greens are actually really good for our gut hormones. They have a huge impact on blood sugar regulation, appetite, satiety, and so on. And activating these gut hormones via bitter foods is kind of mimicking the hormonal response of actually gastric bypass surgery. So a natural way to mimic the medical intervention for weight loss in this country, which is pretty powerful.
We have embedded many aspects of our expressions of problem solving and health generation in horticulture. And so if we're going to say, what is the root of successful long-term living, it's where do you find that root? It's in your soil. The soils continue to be depleted as they are. There's just no way that we can compensate through medicine, supplements, and behavioral patterns for the nutrients that those soils have been devoid of.
Pero en cuanto a las frutas, no había restricción. Si había un árbol lleno de mangos, la gente que pasaba llegaba y cortaba. Nadie decía nada. Todo el mundo cogía lo que ocupaba. Pues habían cosas, cuando no habían, no se comía. Se comía lo que había.
Τώρα μπορεί να πάνε να δούμε και εδώ και έχει ντομάτες, έχει πιπεριές, έχει μεριζάνες. Έχει τους ταμπουράες, ξέρεις τους ταμπουράες, αυτό το κόκκινο κολοκύθι που γίνεται μεγάλο. Το εξάμηνο του χρόνου από τους κήπους. Διάφορα. Λαχανικά.
Having a garden, I think, should be mandatory. You have to have a garden, you know, and it's so easy. Anybody with remotely a thumb to plant a weed in the ground and watch it grow can grow vegetables. So I would recommend just getting a plot of land that has some sun, growing a few easy vegetables, but getting that probiotic, touching the soil, making sure that you're setting your sights on what's around you instead of, once again, getting something that's been shipped from South America by plane or train or car and then having it, you know, highly marked up in your grocery store, not being wild whatsoever, is a whole nother realm. So go back to the simple, go back to the basics, and I think you'll start to interact with your food in a totally different way.
自給自足の時代ですから、畑は芋、野菜植え付けして、で着るものは自分たちで。
後半なんか当たらなかったのよ。お芋。畑にお芋植えて、これを取ってきて、カズラ植えてから、このお芋が入ったら、このお芋を取ってきて。
Io veramente, vi dicevo, facevo il controlino. E quando mi sono congelato nel 1945, siccome non c'era lavoro, mi ho dato un pezzettino di terreno a mio padre e vivevo in campagna.
Psellano, patate, arance, limoni, mandarini, eccetera, eccetera.
Claro que es mejor.
¿Por qué?
Porque así lo creó mamá a nosotros. Nosotros como vivíamos en el campo, y ya solo eso, me mataba el cerdo, sacaba la manteca y la freía, la cebolla y todo eso, y hacía el gallo pinto, o sea, arroz limpio. Y eso era lo que comíamos. Y carne. No había otra clase de alimento.
私のお父さんお母さんの時代はもう電気もないね、それから車もない、もう畑から取ってものを食べる、そういう生活でした。
When you are in your host environment or native environment, everything that is necessary for you to adapt to that is in there. Your mitochondria is on the long term geographically adapted to that, and your energy source, which is the foods that you eat, is geographically also adapted to you. There's a more rapid adaptation now that's being seen. For example, if they change the food of the elderly, within 24 hours, the gut microbiota changes. So we could see how our bodies actually exquisitely adapted to the environment that it's in. So we have to take a look at how to be part of the environment instead of being separate from it.
There's more and more research that shows us that not eating organic or the chemicals that we're exposed to when we're not eating organic are tied to different disease states. So we are introducing more of that dysfunction when we introduce more of the toxic chemicals into our diet, our environment, our air, everything. It is a non-negotiable.
We've got to get out of the glitter and glamour of Hollywood
and living a fake life and take responsibility for the fact that everything we do impacts every living creature on the planet. And we've got to realize that we are part of a great chain of being and we are chopping links out of it.
The reality is that I think many of us are coming to understand that there are these contexts, like we really would like and need the world to also be healthy, for us to really feel like, you know what, I'm feeling good in my body, there's going to be a future for myself and my children. So health, the definition of health is becoming more integrated with what would have maybe traditionally been even considered socio-political and spiritual aspirations.
I believe that we need to develop a more personal relationship with ourselves so that we can appreciate the environment that we live in, so that we don't destroy the planet that we live in, that we can live in a more happy and healthful way.
One of the hallmarks that's kind of distinguishes the Western world from kind of the ancient world, the Eastern world, is our independence versus kind of the interdependence of kind of some of these cultures that we came from. And so as we learn about longevity, we realize that it's about these inputs. It's about the food that we eat. It's about the chemicals in our environment, the air that we breathe, and all of these things that are actually impacting our longevity in negative ways. And so, you know, we could run to a desert island somewhere and we could hide out and try to avoid the world, but most of us have to live in the world. And so we have to step out of ourselves. And so our self-interest and our enlightened self-interest also becomes an interest for the environment, for the community, in the world. And that's what we're realizing is my health is dependent on the health of a lot of other things in this ecosystem. So now I have to behave differently. And now that I know better, I got to look outside myself.
So I came up with what I call the Tao diet. I just made this up. And the Tao diet is like to try to snap us all out of this personality-centered I, me kind of diet. And so what's the first principle of Taoism is that, you know, we've got this amazing world and universe and planet that's really important. Maybe we should take care of it. So the first principle of the Tao diet is to eat in a way that is supporting the planet at the largest level you can. And the second level is to do the things you can that can support your community. So I really do try to buy most of my food from local farmers. And it's not because I like them. It's because I want to support them and they're part of this group that's all living in this particular place on the planet. And if their farm's 10, 20, 50 miles from my house, that's all the better that we can support that on a community-wide basis. And then lastly, eat in a way that's good for you in terms of your personal health. But as we were talking about earlier, if you're eating in a way that's good for your planet and good for your community, it kind of forces you into eating in a way that's good for your personal health. So it's no longer this moment-to-moment decision about what's best for me. We're starting to think in a more global way, which I think can expand our awareness about things that really matter around us. And so it's not so much, is that organic broccoli or not? Is that good for me or not? The decision is more, what did it really take to produce that food on a global scale? And is that completely destructive for the next generation, or is that something that's going to support them?
I picture this future time when people become stewards of the earth, and they work towards, every time they grow a crop, the soil is better than it was before they grew the crop, that everything is working towards enriching the soil, making it perfect. They understand the nutritional value of whole foods, and they no longer sell processed foods. And, you know, there's just, it's going to be wonderful at some point where we will learn that toxic chemicals simply do not work.
We're pointing fingers at each other. We're pointing fingers at the wrong people doing the wrong things. You know, you're ruining the planet, you know, and it's so easy to speak that way. I mean, I'm sure I'm speaking that way to some degree every single day, like, you know, just kind of subtly even. But the reality is, you know, we're all connected. So if we understand we're all connected and everything has meaning, then that means that we're in this game. And our actions are meaningful and they are directly affecting the reality around us. So we're contributing or taking away from the solution. And the more we understand that, the faster I think we'll see everything around us begin to shift.
I always shift people towards taking action, even if it's one small thing every single, you know, you finished this bottle of shampoo that wasn't so great. Okay, great. Well, now you have to buy a new one. So let's look for a better option.
Cleaning your dishes. Think about everything that goes into cleaning those dishes. What of those things do you need and what of those things do you not really need? You know, what goes into the sponge that was made and how does it impact the earth? And I mean, really just thinking about it. And it doesn't have to be all at one time, but as you go through these things and you do them, thinking about them as you're doing them. When you're buying clothes from the store, well, what's this made of? Am I going to be buying a polyester shirt? What's polyester made of? What resources does it use? If you can take the information and just make simple changes within your control, then you're going to feel a lot better in a lot of different ways. It's going to have a much greater effect on your overall health and wellness.
We're trying to protect all living beings and all future generations from a technology gone wild. But we actually have a tremendous power in two ways. One, our choices about what we buy and eat. And second, what we share. Right now with social media, it's easy to reach a large number of people.
We live in an environment where people don't even know their neighbors anymore. And at this point, it's time to turn it around and get to know your neighbors and get your common concerns with your neighbors vocalized, whether it's at a homeowners association meeting, whether it's at City Hall, up to your senator, up to your House representative, up. It all starts with people coming together, getting petitions together, walking into rooms, voicing their concerns, and doing it in a rational way that helps move the conversation forward.
A lot of times we complicate things and we say, well, we have to start a huge garden in the center of our neighborhood and everybody's got to work it. It doesn't have to start like that at all. Actually, by just making changes to your morning routine alone, you can make huge changes to our environment.
We're at the point right now where we have a great opportunity to use our advances of science in moral and ethical ways that are life affirmative, and we have got to shut down the corporations that are destructive to the planet.
In something that is a disturbance to my conscience when I see what's being perpetrated on humanity and being done through greed and corruption and fraud and lies. We cannot rely on our government. We cannot rely on our FDA. We cannot rely on the CDC. But the truth has to come out. I believe it is coming out at this point in time, and people now have to take responsibility for their health and find true information and not rely on corrupted organizations and individuals that are leading them down the wrong path.
I see that we're in a situation that we've created for ourselves because we're now at a point where the destruction of the planet is bringing us to such a dangerous situation that we have to now overcome all racial, ethnic, religious barriers to become one, because we've created a situation that has to be all hands on deck or we all cease to exist together.
So I think there's very easy ways to establish a responsibility and establish habits that will change our environment for the rest of our lives. Because if you think, if a couple million people do those things, things are going to change.
Thanks for joining us in episode 4 as we took a closer look at environmental toxins and planetary health. As you know by now, this community is so important to us, and that's why we'd love to hear your comments and feedback from this episode. What was the most powerful takeaway for you? And if you have any other tips to help clean up the environment, please let us know in the comments below. And don't miss out on viewing the full interviews from our experts and elders. With well over 100 total interviews, we were only able to fit a portion of each interview into the series. By purchasing the series and becoming a Human Longevity Project ambassador, you will have lifetime access to pick and choose through all of the full interviews. That's of course in addition to owning the 9-part series, MP3s, action plan, and much more. Not to mention, you will directly support our mission of reducing deaths at childbirth. A portion of the proceeds from the Human Longevity Project will be sent to nonprofit organizations that are saving the lives of mothers and newborns in developing countries. We'll continue to work with various organizations across the globe until we reach our goal of impacting the lives of 1 million children. I know that sounds like a monumental task, but with your help, we can make this happen. Thank you so much for joining us. See you tomorrow.